Hey there everybody, it's ToonGal12, or better known as Cartoon12. So you're probably wondering why I skipped the usual intro this time around. Well, that's because while this is another video talking about favorite TV shows, this isn't a top 10 per se. It's more or less just a quick discussion about a couple extra things that I didn't include in my previous video. Most of you who watch my channel already know this, but for any newcomers, I recently posted a video talking about my top 10 favorite episodes of Doctor Who. But seeing as how there's over 800 episodes of the show, I made things easier by picking one favorite story from each Doctor. But with that list came a few stipulations. I didn't include any spin-off series, I didn't count any of the specials where different Doctors met one another, because the episode had to have the Doctor in question stand on his own. And finally, I left Doctors 8 and 12 off the list, 8 because he only got a movie, and 12 because his run isn't finished yet. But it also didn't seem fair to not talk about these exceptions because they're just as important to the history of the show. So if the top 10 list was the main course, think of this as the dessert afterward, something a little extra to add on. For those of you who have yet to see the previous video, you can click the link in the info section below. Otherwise, let's get started. So here we go, my not so quite top 10 discussion of the movies, spin-offs, and specials of Doctor Who. Torchwood was one of two notable spin-offs during the 2005 revival of Doctor Who and lasted all through the 10th Doctor's era of the show. Casting Captain Jack Harkness as the main lead, the series focused on a small team of alien hunters from the Torchwood Institute, a rogue secret agency that investigates alien incidents on Earth and scavenges alien technology for their own use. I'm starting with this one because my thoughts on it are actually pretty brief. And they're pretty brief because I didn't really care for this series, like, at all. Much like what would later happen to me with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., I only got a couple episodes in before I gave up on it. Other than Jack and the occasional companion showing up like Martha Jones, the Doctor never makes an appearance. He's only mentioned, or at least to my knowledge. And if you want to expand the Who universe and make new characters, that's fine. But they have to be characters I care about, and these guys, I'm just not interested. Add to it that this show was aimed for an older audience and didn't have as much humor, and you pretty much have all my turn-offs. Not that I've never enjoyed darker material, heck, Twilight Zone and Outer Limits are two of my favorite TV shows, but to me, the Doctor Who isn't and shouldn't be dark and gritty, at least not as a whole. You need that lightheartedness to balance out the scarier moments, so if you like this series, great. Nothing wrong with that. It just wasn't for me. Okay, so you know what I said about Torchwood? Get ready for the exact opposite. The second of the two spin-offs that came about during the early New Who era, the Sarah Jane Adventures, focused on one of the Doctor's longest-running and most popular companions, Sarah Jane Smith. As an investigative journalist, she solved mysteries and encountered all kinds of alien phenomena around her hometown with the help of her newly adopted son and a couple brave neighborhood kids. Now this was a spin-off I could get into. Despite being aimed at a younger audience, this show definitely did not talk down to kids, giving us complex morals and lessons about friendship, showing true bravery, not judging by appearances, and doing the right thing. Just, you know, without as much grim and grittiness. By putting the focus on average people, the stories and the cast are far more relatable, and I found myself caring way more about this crew than I did at Torchwood. The kids are anything but annoying and have great personalities that don't fall into any one cliche. And Sarah Jane is such a likable character who can be tough as nails when confronting bad guys, but also sweet and motherly to the friends who became her family. Pretty much none of these characters are specially trained agents, so when they get into trouble, they have realistic reactions. Sarah's fear is our fear, especially when the Doctor isn't always around to help bail her out, so when she powers on through and saves the day, it becomes especially heroic and admirable. But even though she wasn't some specially trained super spy, she did, however, have a couple of great gadgets, like her sonic lipstick and her alien-powered supercomputer, Mr. Smith. But most of all, by putting the series' focus on a mainstay companion, it opened the door to revisiting and checking up on a few other old companions, most notably K9, Brigadier Lethbridge Stewart, and Joe Grant, the latter of which starred in one of two appearances the Doctor made on the show. The first being when the 10th Doctor had to stop Sarah Jane from getting married. It's a long story. The other being when the 11th Doctor dropped in on his own funeral. It's an even longer story. But each and every time a familiar face shows up, it constantly reminds us that each person the Doctor has invited into the TARDIS has had their lives changed forever, in some form or another, and when their time in the TARDIS is done, adjusting back to a normal life is different for them all. Some choose to quietly retire, some try to seek out the Doctor again, and some find a new adventure altogether. All in all, after marathoning Who for 8 months, this was a little nice bonus series to complete the journey with, and due to Elizabeth Sladen's passing, it was sadly cut short. She's a great actress that'll greatly be missed, and in my eyes will always be the Doctor's best companion. Moving on from spin-offs to specials, we now come to the first of a couple instances where the Doctor met himself? Well, hey, it is time travel after all. You're bound to run into your past incarnations at some point. And this adventure begins when the Time Lord's in a crisis. A powerful force is draining their energy into a mysterious black hole, and they must recruit the Doctor to save them. But one Doctor isn't enough for this mission. This time, 3 of the Doctor's incarnations, aided by Joe Grant and Unit, mostly the Brigadier though, must face the wrath of Omega, a fallen Time Lord trapped in a universe of antimatter, which has one thing on his mind: revenge. At the time of the special's release, the show was celebrating its 10th anniversary, so the producers decided they wanted to do something special for the occasion. And though this would be the first of many actor crossover stories, for me personally, this is my favorite of the bunch. While the other specials would tend to focus more on just shoving in as many cameos and references as possible, this first one is far more simple and is more concerned with just telling a good story. Omega himself is both an interesting and tragic villain with a memorable design and acting so over melodramatic it can actually get quite funny at times. But the real highlight of this, of course, is seeing all 3 of the Doctors, up to that point anyway, in the same room together.
Oh, so you're my replacements. A dandy and a clown.
They've all got great chemistry together, and just seeing the first and second Doctors in color is surreal enough. Now, due to William Hartnell's declining health, he unfortunately wasn't able to participate as much as everyone else, but the writers found a clever way around it by having the first Doctor just show up on a TV screen to give advice to everyone else. Supposedly, he was actually just sitting in a studio reading his lines off of cue cards, but to the man's credit, it's hard to tell. The way he interacts with the other characters sounds totally natural, and 2 and 3's banter is beyond hilarious. If you're going to put a space hobo and Gallifrey and James Bond together, you know there's going to be friction. But of course, in the end, they managed to get along well enough to get the job done and save the day. As crossovers go, this is definitely one of the better ones, but it certainly wouldn't be the last. Jumping from 3 to 5, we now increase the Time Lord count for the 5 Doctors, in which the Doctor's past incarnations, one by one, are snatched out of time and space and transported to the Phantom Zone? Okay, actually it's the Death Zone on Gallifrey. Geez, Death Zone, Phantom Zone, Forbidden Zone, Twilight Zone, what's with all these mysterious bad places called a zone? Anyway, the Doctors are all reunited with some old friends and pitted against their deadliest enemies in the game of Rassilon. Someone's manipulating the Doctors and his companions in order to claim the most ancient and powerful secret of the Time Lords. But can everyone survive the challenges and uncover the traitor before it's too late? For the show's 20th anniversary, the showrunners decided to pull out all the stops and throw in everything but the kitchen sink, giving us Daleks, Cybermen, the Master, and virtually every available Who actor at the time, whether they're main players or just cameos. But much as I like all the references, perhaps there's a bit too many. This special hardly pauses for a breath, keeping the action and the plot going as fast as possible, and your mileage may vary on how good of a thing that is or not. Sometimes less is more. Also, this special should actually probably be called the 4.5 Doctors, since Tom Baker decided to not appear in this episode, so the producers cleverly got around this by using footage from the unaired and unfinished serial Shada. So even though we're seeing clips, it's still sort of new footage, so it was smart to use an episode no one would ever see. But despite these couple nitpicks, this special is still pretty awesome. Having the gang split up into different teams and enter this skyscraper thing at different points, going through all sorts of puzzles and traps a la Indiana Jones. I also find it interesting how they paired up an old Doctor with a new companion and vice versa, like the first Doctor and Tegan, for example. It leads to some pretty different dynamics among the group. And speaking of the first Doctor, William Hartnell had sadly passed away by this point, so they brought in Richard Hurndall to replace him. And he does a pretty good job, getting both the voice and the mannerisms pretty close. And even though I think this special went on actor overload, it is nice to see a bunch of old faces turn up, especially Susan, who we hadn't seen since the Dalek invasion of Earth. It's almost as if the writers watched the previous special and decided to flip the roles around, this time giving the first Doctor time to shine and having the most current Doctor out of the action for most of it, which is perfectly fine because the fifth Doctor serves a much better role as the guy who gets transported back to the Gallifreyan capital and has to figure out who's behind all this. It's an interesting mystery that doesn't detract from the physical action going on in the tower, and also contains one of the best line reads ever.
You are authorized to use the mind probe.
What? No, not the mind probe.
So despite being a bit overcrowded and going on reference overload, this is still a great celebration of the show's history. If you're just getting into the show, you'll probably wind up confused, but if you're a longtime fan, you're in for a good time. Okay, you know how the first two specials pretty much got everything right? Now let's see how they get it all wrong. The second Doctor and his companion Jamie are visiting a space station on behalf of the Time Lords because some scientists are tinkering with a time machine. But soon enough, the Sontarans attack and capture both the Doctor and the prototype time machine with the intent to use the Doctor's DNA to enable him to complete the machine and travel through time. And so enters the sixth Doctor and his companion Perry, who must now save the second Doctor and time itself. One of the few good things I can say about this episode is that the locations are pretty, considering the crew actually went to Spain to film this, although it seems there was little point to it considering most of the footage is on a space station, indoors, or around one house out in a field. That and Patrick Troughton's performance is always awesome to watch. Both Tu and Jamie are the biggest perks to this story, and the transition from black and white to color at the beginning is a nice touch. But the rest of this just seems to take everything that made the first two specials great and throws it all in reverse. 6 incarnations of the Doctor now? Let's show only 2 of them. Dozens of past companions? Let's have virtually none of them. A rich series history? Pfft, who's got time for that? Let's just have a generic adventure with some secondary villains and some new villains that we'll thankfully never see again. Add to it things that just don't make sense. Why is Tu and Jamie suddenly so old? I mean, okay, we the audience know why they're older, but within the context of the show, they should still be young. And not only that, but they're on a mission for the Time Lords? When? Why? Tu was still on the run from the Time Lords during his incarnation, and calling them up during the War Games episode was made in desperation. It's the reason he got put on trial, banished to Earth, and forced to regenerate. None of this adds up. But by far the biggest problem with this story is its tone. It starts off serious enough, but then slowly becomes a dark comedy with the death of a character being played for laughs, and at one point the Androgums turn Tu into a cannibal like them, and they start making jokes about how they're going to eat people? I'm sorry, is this episode even real or a parody of one? But saddest of all, 2 and 6 don't even share a lot of screen time together. The best they do in working together is knocking a table over. I mean, the rivalry between 2 and 3 made sense, but here it just seems forced. Even at one point, 6 says something like, oh, when you time travel, you're bound to run into yourself at some point. He treats this all like it's no big deal, whereas in the previous specials, meeting your past incarnations was the equivalent to crossing the streams in Ghostbusters. It was a really risky thing to do. And that's really the best way to describe this special, as in not very special at all. There are a few funny moments, and the stuff with Tu and Jamie is by far the best, but honestly, you can skip this story and not miss anything. And it's a shame because multiple doctors meeting each other should be treated with more care and respect than this. Also known as Day of the Doctor, this special extended episode was not only shown in select theaters but also achieved a Radio Times Audience Award and the Guinness World Record for the largest ever simulcast of a TV drama, so you know this episode was more than important. As for the plot, it focuses on the last days of the Time War, in which a newly revealed incarnation of the Doctor called the War Doctor chooses to use a sentient doomsday weapon called the Moment to kill both the Daleks and his own people to finally end the war. But the Moment has other ideas and opens a fissure to show the War Doctor two of his eventual incarnations. With the help of the 10th and 11th Doctors, can the War Doctor find an alternate solution to ending the Time War? Well, with over 50 years worth of material to feature and cover, this full-length movie could have gone so horribly wrong, though not as much as the two Doctors. But I'm happy to say this special manages to be a loving tribute to the show with plenty of sly references for the older mega fans, yet is streamlined enough that the newer fans could miss them and not become lost or confused. In fact, this whole movie actually reminded me more of the Three Doctors special in that it stuck with just a few characters and was more focused on just telling a good story versus trying to cram everything with the kitchen sink in, something the Five Doctors was guilty of. Only this time, instead of 1, 2, and 3, we got the new Who cast, mainly not quite Rose Tyler, Clara, 10, 11, and the new War Doctor played brilliantly by John Hurt. As for the plot itself, a lot of it relies on plenty of twists and turns, so I really don't want to give anything away here, but it was interesting to finally get some more insight into an extremely important era of the Doctor's history that up until this point was only mentioned or hinted at, that being the infamous Time War between the Time Lords and the Daleks, ending with Gallifrey's destruction and the Doctor becoming the last of the Time Lords. And the way 10 and 11 play off each other is fantastic. Their banter starts off funny enough, but as time goes on and they start arguing over what's the right thing to do, you start to see how much the Doctor changed over time. 10 is still in remorse over what he did in the war, while 11 tries desperately to ignore it. The man who regrets and the man who forgets is something I didn't really notice until they were literally compared back to back. But of course the trio manages to get along well enough so they can pull off one of the most amazing stunts of the show's history by calling upon all of their past incarnations to stop the war and save Gallifrey. The way they splice together all these old clips to make it look like all the Doctors are talking to one another is beyond amazing. And considering my 8-month-long marathon of the entire show was capped off by this scene, it practically brought a tear to my eye. Now that is how you do a proper finale. So whether you're an old or new fan of Doctor Who, this movie is definitely a must-see, and it's a nice way to give the show a very happy 50th birthday. Speaking of movies, we now finally move away from the specials and jump backwards a bit to take a look at one of the most mixed and debated pieces of the show's history, that being Doctor Who the movie. Quick history lesson, this made-for-TV film was intended to be a backdoor pilot of sorts to try and revive Doctor Who after it had been cancelled after the 7th Doctor's run, as well as being primarily broadcast in America. Keep in mind, back in the 90s, the internet wasn't what it was today, and we didn't have special channels like BBC America to watch shows from across the pond, so Doctor Who wasn't as widespread as it is today. So for many, this TV movie was their first exposure to the Time Lord and his adventures. And how did it fare? Well, let's look at the plot first. The 7th Doctor is returning home to Gallifrey with the remains of his arch-nemesis, the Master. Forced off course, the TARDIS arrives in San Francisco on New Year's Eve 1999, where the Doctor is critically wounded in a gangland gun battle. At the local hospital, Dr. Grace Holloway fights and fails to save his life. Later in the morgue, the Doctor comes back to life in his 8th regeneration. But he's not the only one. The Master has also found himself a new body. As the clock counts down to the start of the new millennium, the Doctor and his new companions must stop the Master from destroying all life on Earth. It's a shame that this was the 8th Doctor's only on-screen adventure because Paul McGann does a really great job. He showed a lot of potential here and is instantly mysterious, charming, and likable. It's also the first time he kisses a companion, which has been debated to death, but I chalk it up to him still being a bit loopy over regenerating. And even if you do treat it more romantically, I think that would have made the show more interesting. Hooking up with a companion could be cute, but also heartbreaking considering how long he can live. That was pretty much the case with him and Rose Tyler, so I don't get what the big issue is here. Also, the redesign of the TARDIS is freaking amazing. Just look at this place. It's like a steampunk lover's dream come true. However, this movie does have a major problem, and that is treating it just as a pilot with no prior knowledge of the show. It isn't that great, as there's a lot of references and things left unexplained unless you've watched the show before. However, if you have been following the show and just treat it as just another extended adventure, I think it's pretty decent. There's just two hang-ups that everyone seems to have with the plot. One, why would the Time Lords construct a device whose power source can only be opened by the retinal scan of an alien, meaning a human? Well, considering the Doctor was battling the Master before the start of the movie, maybe it was the Doctor himself who changed the passcode, as it were, to make sure that the Master and any other enemies wouldn't get their hands on it. And considering how much he usually travels with a human companion, I don't think it'd be that hard for him to access it if he needed to. And two, at one point, the Doctor mentions he's half human. This pretty much comes right out of nowhere, and to this day, fans debate on this weird piece of information. What's my 2 cents on it? Well, for one thing, the Doctor lies. Like a lot. So this could have been just another random thing he spouted off to throw people off. But taking it seriously and really thinking about it, I don't think it's that far out of the question. What's to say a Time Lord didn't come to Earth at some point and decide to hook up with one of the locals? This might actually explain why the Doctor's such an outcast even among his own people, and out of all the places in time and space he can go, he somehow always chooses to come to Earth. It's where like 80% of his companions are from. Putting it that way, I think the whole half-human idea actually makes more sense the more you try to apply it. It makes his character more interesting, and I give props to the writers for trying to do something different. So is this movie flawed? Yes. But does it deserve to be bashed so much? I don't think so. I would have loved to see where the 8th Doctor went, on screen that is. Guess we'll just have to settle for the audio dramas and spin-off novels. But I still like the film all the same, and here's hoping that more people will warm up to it because Paul McGann deserves to be remembered for his great performance. And finally, to cap off both this video and all this talk about the show spanning 2 videos, we'll end on a quick discussion of Peter Capaldi, the 12th Doctor. Capaldi had actually appeared back in a 10th Doctor episode playing a totally different character, and interestingly enough, the writers managed to weave in that little fun fact into the actual plot of the show. What it is exactly, I won't spoil, but it's brilliant. We also got a tiny teaser of him in the 50th anniversary special, so I'm interested to see if and how the show will cover the events of that movie from his perspective. But as for 12 himself, he's not my most favorite incarnation, but I like him just fine. There are moments where he seems to harken back to some of his past incarnations, most notably 1, 3, 6, and the darker sides of 9 and even 10. And that's how I can best sum up this newest series, dark. Now, of course, Doctor Who's had plenty of dark moments and creepy stuff, but it always had a fair share of humor and fun to it to balance out. And while 12's era does have the occasional funny moment or line, it pales in comparison to 10 and 11's run. Then again, that's just my own personal taste. As for the episodes, they're all pretty decent. The Caretaker, where the Doctor goes undercover at the school Clara teaches at, is probably the only one so far I didn't like at all. The villain's completely forgettable, and the mistaken identity humor just doesn't do it for me. But as for favorite episodes, some of them include Into the Dalek, where the TARDIS team goes on a fantastic voyage inside a Dalek to figure out why it seemingly turned good. It really puts into perspective the nature of the war between the Time Lords and the Daleks, how dark and cold the Doctor can be on the inside, and makes you question if the Daleks are capable of mercy and morality after all. There's Robot of Sherwood, which teams up the Doctor with the legendary Robin Hood. Considering that Errol Flynn's Adventures of Robin Hood's one of my favorite movies, this episode is pure swashbuckling fun. The side plot about the crashed spaceship's pretty much textbook Who, but it all leads up to an interesting exchange between the Doctor and Robin Hood, where they practically break the fourth wall and talk about how in the future they'll only be seen as fictional characters, but their legendary stories will live on to inspire others. Listen, which deals with the Doctor and Clara chasing down an invisible monster that's more than what it appears. This episode is the perfect lesson of there's nothing to fear but fear itself, with some great introspection on all the main characters, and it's probably the closest we've gotten to seeing a backstory on the Doctor. And finally, there's Flatline, my personal favorite 12th Doctor adventure so far, in which Clara is pretty much left on her own to have to stop a batch of aliens who live in the second dimension and are trying to breach into the third. The idea of the two-dimensional monsters is interesting and actually reminds me of the plot to Behold Ek, one of my favorite episodes of The Outer Limits, which I talked about in my Outer Limits video. Then there's the side plot about the TARDIS slowly shrinking in size, on the outside that is, which is played mostly for laughs, but it's also interesting to see the TARDIS dimension bending technology used in the opposite way. A lot of the imagery of people being absorbed and flattened into the environment is incredibly creepy, and the plan that Clara comes up with to ultimately trick and defeat the monsters is very creative. So all in all, while Who's definitely gone a bit more on the dark and brooding side, I still very much enjoy the show, and with Capaldi at the helm, I can't wait for it to return and see where the series goes next. And there you have it. These are my thoughts on all the major, noteworthy movies, spin-offs, and specials to come out of Doctor Who. If you're interested in my top 10 favorite episodes overall, then head on over to my other video and check that out too. Until then, thanks for watching, thanks for listening, and I'll see you all next time.